Rio Congress here, Mike Williams from the UK Treasury, and of course Chair of the all-important MLI ad hoc subgroup. Mike, thanks so much for taking out the time to talk to us here. I think the buzzwords today were 2017 and 18, as Pascal Amans from the OECD said, are the years of BEPS implementation, and the OECD is going to see whether BEPS is being properly and consistently implemented. And one of the big cogs in that BEPS implementation wheel is the MLI. So if you could quickly take our viewers back home in India and across the globe on what exactly was discussed here. There were 15-20 questions that came up, so many searching, probing questions on how MLI is going to work, how is it going to be implemented, the plethora of questions and interplay of MLI with the domestic law, with one of the parties implementing it, one not implementing, so many permutations and combinations. Mike, if you could take the audience and the viewers through some of them.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. I think there was an interesting panel because it is actually quite difficult to do what the MLI is trying to do. You need to take a large number of bilateral treaties and find an efficient means of amending them quickly. Countries got into the BEPS project because they felt that there's a need to change the tax rules as reflected in treaties, but if you can't do that fairly quickly, then almost what is the point of doing it? Which is why when we set up the BEPS project, we recognised the need to try and achieve the multilateral instrument. So that's if you like, the overall purpose. I think the difficulty then is how do you manage to use this one single instrument to modify thousands of treaties when they will all have either significant or insignificant differences, even down to the fact that Article 2 in one treaty will be Article 3 in the next. How do you get the instrument to cope with that? And I thought the panel did well to go through and explain how that's possible. Also, I thought the panel made clear that nobody has to sign the instrument, but the instrument is an efficient and quick way of meeting obligations that people have signed up to as part of the BEPS project. Rather than having to do lots of bilateral renegotiations of existing treaties. It also, I think, is good. Let's say that the UK and India ratify quickly. An advantage of this is that, in a sense, India and the UK are then waiting, if you like, for other countries to join in, and we are ready. Whereas, with a bilateral treaty, nobody is ready. If a third country comes along, then India and the UK would have to do bilateral negotiations, which takes a lot of time. So in terms of speedily making changes to the international tax rules, then the instrument will enable us to do that.
One of the panelists made a very interesting comment. One of the quotes of the Rio Congress said, MLI is an instrument, not an obligation. Could you explain that, Mike, to our viewers?
Yes, I think the key point there is that people have entered into obligations as part of the BEPS process. We have all signed up to the proposition that we will introduce anti-abuse provisions in our treaties. But nobody has said that they have to use any particular way of doing that. Nobody has said that we have to use this instrument. So the instrument isn't itself an obligation, but it's an efficient way of enabling countries to meet the obligations that they do have. So, otherwise, let's say there's a need to amend 10 treaties, and we are obliged to do that, then there's an obligation without the instrument to do 10 lots of negotiations. But that, of course, takes time, and also takes time in our parliament.
You had an example of the US, Pascal mentioned this, that the US has not signed the multilateral instrument, the MLI, but they don't need to because they are already implementing the minimum standards. Whereas in the case of Brazil, we are not so sure. We are not so sure in the case of some other countries. So the question, Mike, is the question that Philip Baker posed, that whether MLI means tax peace or complete appending of tax treaties, and therefore a possible reigniting of tax litigations in the near future is still up in there. No one has an answer to that question, Mike. Or are you a bit more hopeful than Philip?
Well, I mean, two things. One, it's for the peer review process under the BEPS implementation framework, the inclusive framework, to decide whether any particular country meets the BEPS minimum standards or not. So, we mustn't try and prejudge that here or now. Equally, I think the BEPS project did create more consensus among countries about the international tax rules, and I think that probably means that there will be more consistency between countries on how they do international tax transactions. On the other hand, we'll probably need to build on that and achieve more consensus, because there are other issues like digital taxation where the international standards need to be looked at.
You had someone from the OECD, if I recollect correctly, Monica Bhatia from the Global Forum mentioned a couple of days back, or someone else said in that panel that on automatic exchange of information, it is the fear of blacklist that is getting countries to sign in, and therefore 102 countries have signed up to the common reporting standards. Will the peer review process, will there be enough fear, or will the countries take it enough seriously, and will that ensure, is that going to ensure that BEPS is implemented as uniformly as possible across the globe?
Well, I think countries don't likely enter into obligations, particularly they don't likely enter obligations where they know there's going to be a peer review process that's going to test whether they have really met those obligations. So it seems to me that having done that, having made the commitment, on the one hand, they are likely intrinsically, I think, to then try and meet it. But on the other, the peer review is a useful spur. If you know the peer review is coming along and you've not had time to implement your obligations, maybe you think you should do it before the peer review. So
but you have no option, Mike, but to implement minimum standards, right?
The countries have entered into commitments that they will meet the minimum standards. So if they are to meet their word, then they don't have an option around that.
Mm-hmm. And the last question, Mike, is the juxtaposition or the interplay of MLI with the domestic laws. Now, you have 71 countries signing up to the MLI, all of whom, or many of whom, would have to go back and possibly amend their domestic laws as well. So it's not so simple, Mike, finally, isn't it?
No, it isn't simple, and it seems to me that is one of the most complicated aspects of it. You have countries like the UK and India which ratify a treaty and also then reflect the treaty in domestic law, but you have another set of countries that merely by ratifying the treaty it then becomes part of the domestic law. Equally, you have countries that have very cumbersome processes to ratify treaties. You have others where it's fairly straightforward, and we have had to accommodate all those.
So is it possible that you're going to have different starting dates for different treaties of different countries, and journalists like us and tax professionals are going to have a field day?
Well, I think it's inevitable that there will be different starting dates, but then that would also be true if we had vast numbers of bilateral renegotiations. You would get that. Equally, we were quite concerned that there should be one central point that would determine when a country had ratified, which is why the instrument says it's ratified when the country notifies the Secretariat as the custodian. So it's not for journalists to work out whether a country is ratified or not. So some more work, but not that much perhaps.
Barely 10-12 months back, this ad hoc subgroup was set up, I think last November, and in a record 7 months time, you've got 7-8 months time, you've got the Paris Accord. You got 71 countries signing up now. It was 65 at that time, I think, on June 7th, the historic day. How's the journey in the last 7-8 months been? Has it been surreal?
It's been longer than that. We did quite a lot of work from 2015 onwards. Yeah. I think the difficult thing has been the thing that you identified earlier. How do you do domestic ratification when people are used to either doing a multilateral convention or a bilateral treaty? They're not used to using a multilateral convention to amend bilateral treaties, and I think people having to work through that took quite a lot of the time.
Mike, in many ways it's been a BEPS Express, which is what we've been calling for the last few years. That's chugged along without much of derailment or bumps. Is there any speed bumps that you expect in the next 12 months? When we start implementing BEPS, we are at the business end, as some would call it, Mike, and 12 months down the line at the Seoul Congress, what do you think we will be talking as far as BEPS and MLI goes?
Well, I think if we just focus on the MLI instrument, I think inevitably some countries, given the novelty of it, may encounter issues in ratifying, but I'm sure that those issues will be solved.
Mm-hmm. And 12 months down the line, what will we be discussing?
I think we might be discussing that significantly more than 71 countries have signed up. So, and I would hope that by the Seoul Congress, the instrument will be enforced because at least 5 will have ratified and notified the OECD.
Thanks so much, Mike, for talking to us. Thank you so much.